Hello and welcome to the Marcus Williams Training Academy Professional Misconduct Response Program Training and Certification course, the Pmrp. This is lesson 7, and today we are going to talk about appeals, the pros and cons of allowing or writing in an appeal process in your misconduct policy. We'll give you some things to think about. And if you decide you want to include appeals or the ability to appeal in your process, some of the things to look out for, some of the pros and cons. My name is Marcus Williams. I am the president and founder of the Marcus Williams Training Academy. I worked in law enforcement for 16, 17 years as a police officer and then as a special agent with NCIS. And in the criminal justice world, there's a very set appeals process, but it all happens through the courts. So as the investigator, I was not involved in very many appeals, and that's a good thing from the investigator standpoint because that means my investigations were solid and there weren't any reasons or justification for an appeal after a conviction. So the way it works is the case goes through the prosecution, and then if there is a conviction, after that point, the defendant can appeal, and there are different grounds that they can use to base their appeal. And there are multiple avenues. Many people appeal multiple times under multiple different reasons or causes. And as the investigator, you really don't hear about it. In fact, you would never know that an appeal has been filed unless that appeal is accepted by the courts and it comes back to where you need to testify or they need to talk to you about an aspect of the case. So it was very rare. In fact, throughout my career, I don't think I ever was involved in an appeal in the criminal justice system. However, in an administrative case, when I was the primary investigator for sexual misconduct involving students under Title IX at Brigham Young University, we had appeals written into our process in our sexual misconduct policy. And as such, appeals became a regular part of the process. And so I was really able to see the pros and cons. So as I worked with them and developed a very clear understanding, it's different than the criminal justice system. So it can't operate the same. You can't just take those rules and dump them into an administrative process. But there are still a lot of similarities. So the first question that you have to ask is, if you're going to allow appeals, what are you going to allow them to appeal? You have to actually include that in your process. Here's the thing. In a misconduct case, one party is always going to be upset with the outcome. Very rarely are you going to walk away where everyone is satisfied or happy. Especially, if there's a finding, your respondent will be upset. If there's not a finding, your complainant will be upset. We've talked about that before. We've brought up how to manage that, how to minimize that impact. But because one party is always unhappy, one party is always going to want a second opinion or an appeal. People are used to the ability, if they don't agree with something, they can go to another source or another person. If you go to a doctor and you get a diagnosis and you believe there's an issue with it or you don't agree with it, you can go get a second opinion somewhere else. So pretty much in every aspect of our life, if we don't agree with the way something turned out, we can go to a different source and we can shop around until we find the result we want. That's not really how an investigation works or misconduct works, but that's the perspective or reality that they live in or the expectations that they have because that's how it works in other aspects of their life. So, are you going to allow them to appeal the finding, the decision made at the end of the investigation? So, we talked about you may have the investigator may just write the investigative report and someone else make a decision whether there's enough evidence for a finding and take the judge jury role, or you may have the investigator do both, where the investigator does the investigation, writes the report, and decides whether there's a finding or not. So that decision maker, it doesn't matter how you have developed that in your process. So are you going to allow them to appeal the decision of that decision maker? The finding. What about if there's a finding and discipline, are they allowed to appeal the discipline? Say they think the discipline is too harsh. You fire someone and they believe that they should have just gotten time off without pay or a letter of warning. Can they appeal the discipline? Are you required by your state employment laws, by your, you have union workers, do you have contracts, do you have bargaining agreements that require you to allow an appeal process? You still have to decide what they can appeal, the finding, the discipline, or both.